Chapter number 24. The paparazzi. When Britney beat that paparazzo's car with her umbrella, she was acting out of my fantasy. Of all their dark aspects of fame, dealing with the tabloid media, with their shady reporters and rabid photographers, has to be the darkest. And it has gotten so much worse, even in the last 5 years. I remember the first time I was really angry at something the press had printed about Britney. She was on her second concert tour in 2001, and they were criticizing her for having gained a couple of pounds. She picked up the newspaper, read the story, and started crying. My heart sank when I read it. It was so mean-spirited, overblown, and hurtful. I was still naive enough to be surprised and infuriated. That day I started at ground zero with the tabloids, at the beginning of my learning how to endure the media fallout of Britney's fame. I told her bodyguard to keep any kind of negative press away from her. Of course, I can see now that was like protecting your home with one sandbag when a flood was coming. And this was just a drop in the bucket, the first drop of a deluge yet to come. For some reason, after 2002, the negative attention from the tabloids and the paparazzi escalated. I don't know if it was the fact that Britney and Justin had broken up, that her third album hadn't done spectacularly well as at the first two, or if it was a reflection that our culture had taken a turn for the worst, or all of the above. It seemed to me that all of a sudden people were much more interested in the negative things, salacious tidbits about famous people's private lives. There used to be more integrity in the journalism, even with the tabloids. Where are people's manners, their common decency toward one another? In the past, a reporter would identify herself as such and ask if she could talk to me. Now I can be standing in line at a Starbucks, at the grocery store, or the dry cleaners and strike up a friendly conversation with a pleasant stranger, only to find out a few days later that I have given an exclusive to a tabloid magazine. It makes it hard to know whom to trust. In fact, the last pleasant stranger a tabloid sent wasn't pleasant at all. He creeped me out. This so-called magazine stood as low as to plant someone on an airplane in the hopes that he could get to divulge some deep, dark secret about my family. It was pretty awful when I realized later what had happened. I mean, you just wouldn't believe this guy. What a piece of work. Because it still makes me mad. I'm going to tell you about the whole sordid deal because, my golly, I want all of you to shake your heads and join me in a big collective tsk. What is this world coming to? The guy on the plane. I was coming from LA in April 2008 after spending some time with Britney and the boys from the very beginning. We have had a great relationship with Delta Airlines. One of their reps is always kind to me, and he often arranges for me to have a seat in the bulkhead section with a seat open next to me. I always have a book to read, and this time was no exception. I smiled at the nice man next to me, and I settled in with a pillow against the window and opened my book, lost in the story. I barely noticed what was going on 2 seats down from me, although I was vaguely aware that the man was getting up from his seat, which was strange because the plane was all set to take off. I glanced over and saw that he was flustered, sighing and struggling to get his stuff out of the overhead compartment. Then another man took his place, a short guy in his early 30s, wearing strange cowboy clothes and flashing an overly eager look on his face. My radar immediately picked up on something strange. "What you reading?" he asked, peering at my book. "Murder mystery," I said shortly, immediately turning back to my book. "Is it good?" he asked. "Yes, as a matter of fact, I can put this down." I was hoping he would take the hint because 99% of the population would catch a clue that I didn't want to have a heart-to-heart conversation right then. I napped for about an hour and a half, and when I returned to my seat after a visit to the bathroom, he revved up his questions again. His loud questions. "Where are you from?" "New Orleans." I evaded. Does he know somehow whose mother I am? "Do you like it there?" "Yes, it's my home." "Do you have any kids?" "Yes." "Boys or girls?" "A boy and 2 girls." "Boy, you read fast. You went from chapter 28 to chapter 40, he belted out. My discomfort grew. Who watches you closely enough to know which chapters you started and ended at? I tried to turn away and keep reading, but he kept talking and talking, and my inborn southern politeness just would not let me rudely ignore him. I know I should have just shut him down like a bad Broadway musical, but that's just not the way I'm wired. But I'm working on it. He began to tell me a sob story about how he had been struggling to make it in Hollywood and how the people there are such sharks. I nodded politely, not smiling or encouraging in any way, shape, or form. When that didn't get a rise out of me, he started telling me he was a person of faith and how his church had helped him overcome so much in his life. The problem is none of it rang true. My first thought was that he wanted me to help him get his foot on the door in show business. He's baiting me, I thought. He wants me to break down and tell him who I am so he can ask me for help with getting some connections. As long as a person stays with God, he'll be okay, the man said. Yes, I agreed, and turned to the window. Well, that wasn't even the end of it. We were on our descent when I was appalled to realize that this man had stood up and was leaning over his space between us and me, and looking out my window. Is that the Mississippi? He bellowed. I'm sure people could hear him several rows back. It sure is big. I was cringing, totally disbelieving that this yokel was so blatantly invading my personal space. Cowboy call. Must have stood that way for 3 or 4 minutes when the flight attendant finally told him to sit down. I'm sure you could hear him 5 rows down. When the flight ended, he just said goodbye and left. He couldn't even say nice to meet you because we hadn't really ever met, nor had we exchanged even our names. That's what makes what happened later so shocking, but I'm getting ahead of myself. A couple of people from the flight told me how sorry they were this man had been so obnoxious. We knew who you were, but never would have said anything. We couldn't believe the nerve of that guy. When Katie picked me up, we went out for oyster po' boys, and I told her about this odd man on the airplane. We kind of laughed about it, and I forgot all about him. A couple of days later, I got a call from Jamie Lynn's business manager. Did you give an exclusive to Life and Style magazine? She asked. Incredulous. No, I said, scrambling to think of who I had talked to recently. Which nice little old lady at grocery store or sweet 20-something manicurist could have tricked me into giving an interview. This had happened before, and those kinds of experiences served me to make even more guarded by strangers. Lou called the magazine and demanded to know what had happened. They admitted they had planted a reporter on the airplane and said that he had given me his card and told me up front he was from this magazine. He most Assuredly had done neither, nor did I say one word to him about my daughter, other than to admit I had two daughters. When he couldn't get anything out of me, this man unashamedly and manifestly fabricated the whole shooting match. Here's a snippet of my exclusive interview. On April 20, Lynne finally broke her silence, giving an exclusive emotional interview, and she didn't hold back. When asked about Jamie Lynn, now 17, Lynne spoke frankly. I'm a bit disappointed that my youngest daughter got pregnant at such an early age. All I can do is turn to God for answers and just leave it in His hands. But despite her frustration over the situation Jamie Lynn has gotten herself into, Lynne is trying to look on the bright side. Jamie Lynn will be a wonderful mother, she says. She really has a way with children. She's a natural nurturer. I just wish she had waited a bit. Later, the magazine stood behind the reporter, who had told them, apparently, that he had given me his card and identified himself as a reporter from their offices. It's hard for me to believe some in the professional of journalism have stooped so low as to plant people on planes. It really is all about the mighty buck these days, isn't it? The interesting thing is who they sent. If the magazine had assigned a congenial young woman or a materially older lady to try and interview me, I may have said just those kind of things to her. Had she told me honestly who she was and what she wanted, but I never would have opened up one little bit to a smarmy, opportunistic person like that fellow. I'm not saying every magazine has treated us this way. People in particular has been fair to us, but certain tabloid magazines have sunk lower and lower in their quest to get their hands on some dirt. Often they interview some sirs who has an axe to grind with our family for some reason.